I'm Rachel Lawson, 33 years old, and for most of my life I've been the quiet one in the background while my brother Daniel lit up every room, every conversation, every family photo. The night of his engagement party, he raised a glass and made a comment that pulled the air right out of my lungs. Something changed in me then, not with shouting or drama, but with certainty. I hadn't planned to say a word, but when he looked down at me across that ballroom like I barely existed, I knew what I had to do, and I was ready. Before I go any further, drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from, then hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to fight for your place in your own family. I was born and raised in a modest brick home just outside of Hartford, Connecticut. My parents worked hard, Mom ran a home daycare, and Dad worked for the county doing maintenance jobs. We were taught to say thank you, never brag, and always let guests go first. But even with all the lessons about fairness and kindness, there was never any doubt about who the favorite child was. Daniel was 4 years older. He had the kind of confidence that made teachers smile before he even opened his mouth. By the time he hit high school, he already had a shelf full of trophies, and my parents called him our little businessman like it was a title. I remember once when I was about 9, I brought home a watercolor painting that had taken me 3 days to finish. Daniel had just won a mock trial competition, and the living room was still full of balloons and pizza boxes from his celebration. I showed my painting to my mom, and she said, "Oh, honey, that's lovely," before going right back to bragging about Daniel's closing arguments. I never said much. I just kept drawing. I liked the quiet, the colors, the way I could build a whole world with my hands while the rest of the house spun around my brother. But even back then, I noticed how every conversation came back to him. When I asked to join a creative writing camp one summer, Dad frowned and said, "That stuff's fun, but you need to think long-term." Meanwhile, they bought Daniel a brand new laptop for his business electives just because. At holidays, he gave them designer watches and wine decanters. I gave them handmade albums and framed sketches. He was the investment. I was the sentimental afterthought. But I never stopped trying. I worked part-time jobs to buy my own art supplies, took night classes, and eventually got accepted into a small design program at a liberal arts college near Boston. They helped me move into the dorm, but there were no balloons that time, no new furniture, just a reminder to be smart with your money. Daniel, on the other hand, went to Wharton. They threw a going-away party that looked like a corporate fundraiser white tent, catered food guests in dress shoes. My mom made a speech. I remember standing near the edge of the yard with a plastic cup of lemonade, listening as she said, "He's going to take this family to new heights." I wanted to be happy for him. I really did. But it's hard to feel proud of someone who climbs ladders by stepping over your shoulders. By the time I graduated and started working as a junior designer at a small creative agency, Daniel was already working at an investment firm in New York. He showed up to Thanksgiving in a tailored suit and a new BMW. I brought dessert and a hand-designed photo album for our parents. As they opened it, Daniel laughed and said, "Still with the arts and crafts, huh?" I smiled and cleared the dishes. The truth is, I'd gotten used to being the quiet one, the one who blends in. I didn't need to win, I just didn't want to be dismissed. But the night of that party, when Daniel stood in front of 100 guests talking about some people who drift through life and looked right at me, something inside me said enough, and I hadn't planned to say anything. I hadn't. But I had brought something in my purse, something that would make him and everyone else see me clearly, maybe for the first time. The box was still in my purse when I walked into the Bristol Lounge that night. I'd wrapped it carefully silver paper, a neat ribbon. Inside was the press release, the one announcing the acquisition of my company. I hadn't planned on giving it to him. But after that toast, after everything he said in front of that room, I knew I couldn't walk out the same way I came in. The weeks leading up to Daniel's engagement party had been a blur. While my family buzzed over caterers and floral arrangements, I was spending 12-hour days in legal meetings and final reviews. Canvas Connect was about to be acquired by one of the biggest creative tech firms in the country. The final papers were scheduled to be signed the morning of the party. Daniel didn't know any of that. A few days before the event, he called me out of the blue. No greeting, just the parties at the Bristol. 8 to midnight. Black tie optional, but I'd go formal if I were you. Vanessa's family will be there. Then he added, and Liz maybe... Don't wear anything too artsy. Vanessa's dad doesn't really get the whole creative thing. Just keep it simple. You know, professional. It wasn't the first time he'd made a comment like that, but this one stuck with me. I didn't say anything. I just thanked him for the info and hung up. That same afternoon, I got a text from my mother. You're coming to the party, right? It would mean a lot to your brother. And maybe wear something elegant. Just this once. I didn't answer right away. That morning, the morning of the party, I was sitting in our new office conference room downtown. Lawyers on one side, the Artemis team on the other. Rebecca Torres, the CEO, signed. First, then passed the folder to me. I picked up the pen and added my signature. Just like that, it was done. Rebecca smiled and lifted her glass. To the future of creative technology. We clinked glasses. My phone buzzed right then, another text from Daniel. Reminder. Vanessa's family prefers not to talk about money or startups, so maybe skip the business stuff tonight. Just enjoy yourself, and don't be late. I stared at the message for a long time. That afternoon, I stopped by a boutique on Newberry Street. The dress I picked was black floor-length simple, the kind of dress that didn't shout but didn't apologize either. As the sales clerk folded the receipt into a small envelope, I reached into my bag and slid the press release into the silver gift box I'd prepared earlier, just in case. The Bristol lounge looked like something out of a wedding magazine, white orchids spilling out of tall crystal vases, a string quartet playing near the back, waiters weaving through the crowd with champagne on silver trays. The air smelled like eucalyptus and candle wax. At the front, a man in a tux checked the guest list. When I gave him my name, he glanced down and said, "Ah, Adam's sister." Like it surprised him, like it didn't quite fit. My parents spotted me first. My mother walked over quickly, straightening my necklace like I was still 12. "You look lovely," she said. "Vanessa's family will be impressed." My father gave a nod. Daniel's already talking business with her dad. Big night for him. I made my way through the crowd. I recognized some of Daniel's coworkers from past holidays. Most of them gave me the same polite smile, the kind that doesn't expect a follow-up. One man, I think his name was Keith, leaned in and said, "You're in graphic design, right?" Or something like that. Before I could answer, Vanessa appeared beside me. "Rachel's so glad you could come," she said, kissing the air beside both cheeks. "Daniel was worried you might have a work thing." Her dress sparkled under the chandelier. She looked like a page from a luxury catalog. I smiled and said, "Wouldn't miss it." Daniel joined her, sliding a hand around her waist. He looked me over like I was a project he'd forgotten he started. "Wow, Liz, you actually cleaned up." Then he grinned. "Almost didn't recognize you without paint on your clothes." Dinner was served an hour later. I was seated at a table with some of Daniel's colleagues and their partners. Conversation moved fast. Real estate, venture capital, hedge fund moves. I answered a few questions about my work, but each time Daniel redirected the conversation. "Liz has this online thing she runs," he said once, waving his hand. "Design something or other." Anyway, did I tell you what Vanessa's dad is doing in Singapore? I didn't push. I just kept my hands folded in my lap, smiling when it felt polite listening. Then came the toasts. Vanessa's father stood first. He spoke about legacy and family and business partnerships. My dad followed, talking about Daniel's childhood ambitions and the bright future ahead. A few of Daniel's colleagues shared stories always circling back to his drive, his intelligence, his vision. Finally, Daniel stood. "Evenings like this," he said, raising his glass, "they make you think about the different paths we take." The room grew still. Some of us see an opportunity and run with it, build something, make a life. He paused, letting his words settle. And some of us... His eyes drifted to me just for a second. Well, some of us are still figuring it out. A quiet chuckle moved through the room. Not loud, just enough. To different paths, he finished lifting his glass again. To different paths, the room echoed back. My mother looked over at me, her smile tight. My father didn't look up from his dessert. I sat there, the gift box pressing against my side. I had planned to wait to tell them all later, quietly, after the news was public. But Daniel had opened the door, and I wasn't going to leave it swinging behind me. I stood up. The room hadn't noticed yet. Not really. But as I walked toward the front, as I stepped beside Daniel, the murmurs quieted. My heels clicked softly against the polished floor. I reached into my purse and pulled out the silver box. "For the groom," I said, handing it to him. He blinked. "Thanks, Liz," he said, half laughing. "You didn't have to..." "Open it," I said gently. His fingers fumbled a little with the ribbon. Someone near the front leaned in for a better look. He lifted the lid. At first, he just stared. Then he pulled out the paper and read. The color drained from his face. Vanessa leaned over, whispering something, but he didn't respond. He read it again and again. Behind me, someone asked, "What is it?" I turned toward the crowd. My voice didn't shake. "I'm sorry to interrupt," I said. But since my brother brought up life paths, I thought I might share where mine has taken me. I held up the release. "This won't be public until next week, but earlier today, Artemis Digital acquired my company, Canvas Connect, in what their CEO called one of the biggest creative tech deals of the decade." The room went silent. I looked back at Daniel. His hand was still holding the page. His face was completely still. For a moment, no one moved. Daniel still had the paper in his hand, but he wasn't reading anymore. His eyes were fixed on it like he was trying to will the words to disappear. The murmur in the room had died down into something quieter. Curiosity, maybe. Or disbelief. Vanessa leaned in again, her voice soft but clear. "What is it, Dan?" He didn't answer. So I did. "It's a press release," I said. "It won't be public until next week. Artemis Digital has acquired my company, Canvas Connect." I kept my voice steady. "It's a design software platform. We launched just over 3 years ago. Today the deal closed. I didn't say the number. I didn't need to. It was printed right there in bold type, under my name, 9 figures. I looked across the room, then back at Daniel. "You mentioned earlier how some people rise to the challenge, how some just wait around. I just thought, maybe it was time to share where my own path has taken me. There was a moment, just a second, where I almost stepped away. But something told me to finish what I'd started. I wasn't going to say anything tonight," I added. "This is Daniel and Vanessa's celebration, and it still is. But I've been silent for a long time. I've listened to how you all talk about success, about what matters and what doesn't. And I think it's okay if we see it a little differently." I lifted my glass. "To different paths." This time the room responded slowly, but it responded. A few people raised their glasses. Someone in the back murmured, "Well, I'll drink to that." There was a smattering of polite claps, then a ripple of actual applause. I saw Vanessa's father straighten in his seat. I saw 2 of Daniel's colleagues whispering behind their hands. Their expressions changed. Daniel hadn't moved. Finally, he looked at me. His smile was tight. Well, he said my little sister always did like surprises. I turned toward him. "You always said I had hobbies. I thought it might be nice to show you what one of them looks like when it grows up." The laughter that followed wasn't cruel, but it wasn't all friendly either. It hung in the air between us, light and lingering. I felt my father's eyes on me. When I turned, he looked down quickly. My mother had a hand to her mouth. The rest of the night passed in a kind of haze. Vanessa's father made his way over first. He introduced himself, asked a few pointed questions about our technology. "We've been looking for something like that," he said. "Maybe you and I could set up a time to talk." I nodded, handed him a card. His handshake was firm. A few others followed, colleagues of Daniel's mostly. The same people who'd barely made eye contact with me earlier were now asking about my platform's growth, our plans for international expansion, our user base. I answered their questions as best I could, one at a time, not rushing. My parents approached me after that. My mother still had that dazed look, like she was trying to rearrange what she thought she knew. "Rachel," she said softly, "why didn't you tell us? I wasn't sure you'd believe me," I said. "We thought—" She started but didn't finish. "I know." My father cleared his throat. "You built all that from scratch." I nodded. "In your garage, actually." He didn't laugh, but he didn't look away either. "I didn't understand what you were doing," he said. "I guess I still don't. But I should have asked more questions." We stood there for a moment. The music had picked up again. People were moving back to their tables. "I'm glad you came tonight," he added. "Really?" I just nodded. Daniel found me later near the coat check. Most of the guests had gone. The lights were a little dimmer now, the waitstaff starting to clear glasses from the tables. "You planned this," he said quietly. I looked at him. "No. I planned to tell the family after the press release went out. I brought the box just in case. But your toast changed my mind." He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "You could have said all that another night." I smiled. "You could have toasted differently." He looked away, jaw tight. Then he asked, "The company, it's really that successful?" "It is." He nodded once. "Well, congratulations." "Thank you," I said. "And congratulations on the engagement. Vanessa seems strong." That got a short laugh. "She is." He didn't try to say anything else. We just stood there a minute. Then I picked up my coat. As I turned to leave, Vanessa stepped into the hallway. "Rachel," she said with a warmth that hadn't been there earlier, "I'd love to have lunch sometime soon. I want to hear more about your story. It's inspiring." I told her I'd be happy to. Outside, the air was cool and still. I walked to my car with my shoes in one hand, my purse tucked under my arm. I hadn't expected the applause. I hadn't expected the questions or the handshakes or the looks. But I knew this part, the quiet after, the moment you sit alone with what just happened. And I knew it wasn't over. Not yet. Because once the headlines went live, once the rest of the world saw the numbers and the names and the photos, they'd have to decide who I was too. But I already knew. The next morning I woke up before the sun. The apartment was quiet. No emails yet, no buzz from the press, no missed calls, just stillness. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and watched the sky change color through the window. The press release would go live in 4 hours. The media had already been briefed. The headlines were coming. But that wasn't the part I was thinking about. I was thinking about what it meant, how for the first time the silence from my family might start to shift. Not because I needed their approval anymore, but because I'd stopped waiting for it. When the article hit the wire just after 9 a.m., it didn't take long. First, a notification from one of the industry blogs. Then an email from our public relations rep, top story Artemis Digital acquires Canvas Connect in landmark deal. My phone started buzzing with messages, some from former classmates, some from investors who had passed on us in the early days. A few were from people I hadn't heard from in years, old coworkers, even a college roommate. Then the message came through from my mother. "Just saw the article. We're so proud of you." "Can we talk later?" I replied. "Of course. I'm free tonight." I kept the rest of the day quiet. No celebration, no press conference, just our regular team stand-up meeting and a few calls with the integration team from Artemis. Everyone was energized. The future of the company was secure. Our roadmap was expanding, and for the first time we had resources to back up our vision. That night, I drove to my parents' house. They'd made dinner. Nothing fancy, just roast chicken and vegetables. It felt like the same meal we'd eaten 100 times growing up. Except this time, there was something different in the air. My dad stood when I walked in and reached for my coat. My mom gave me a long hug. Neither of them brought up the party. Not at first. Over dinner, they asked questions. My dad wanted to understand the product better, so people use it for designing websites or marketing stuff. Both, I said. It's used by creative teams, freelancers, even a few universities. My mom nodded. We didn't know it had gotten so big. It grew faster than I expected, I said, keeping my tone steady. After the dishes were cleared, my dad stayed behind in the kitchen with me. He leaned against the counter arms, crossed eyes fixed on the floor for a moment. "You know, Rach," he said, "I didn't see this coming. I always figured Daniel would be the one. I don't know. Who took the lead? I didn't say anything. But what you've done..." He stopped, cleared his throat. "I didn't understand it before. I should have asked more questions." He looked at me then. "I'm sorry." I gave him a quiet nod. "Thanks." That was all that needed to be said. Over the next few weeks, the way people spoke to me began to change. Family friends started calling. Former clients reached out to reconnect. My parents brought me up in conversation, our daughter Rachel, the one who started the company with a kind of pride I hadn't seen before. Daniel didn't reach out. Not right away. 3 days later, though, he showed up at the office. My assistant buzzed me. "There's someone here asking to see you. Says his name's Daniel." I came out to the front. He was standing near the reception desk looking around like he wasn't sure what he had just walked into. "Your assistant said you're booked for weeks," he said. She almost didn't let me up. I motioned toward the glass doors. "Come on back, we'll make time." Inside my office, he looked around carefully. The floor-to-ceiling windows, the glass whiteboard covered in diagrams, the framed design award on the side wall. "Nice setup," he said. I expected, I don't know, beanbags. "We grew out of that phase," I said. I offered him coffee. He declined. We sat across from each other at the small table by the window. He glanced around again, then leaned back in his chair. "You really pulled this off." I nodded once. "Took a while." He was quiet for a beat. "I used to think I was pushing you. You know, motivating you. Maybe I overdid it." I waited. "I didn't mean to make you feel like you weren't enough." I folded my hands. "You don't have to say everything. I got the message. For years." He exhaled, looked out the window. "I guess I just thought you needed a nudge. I didn't realize you were already moving." We talked for another 15 minutes about the company, the Artemis team, what came next. It wasn't a perfect conversation, but it was the first honest one we'd had in a long time. By spring, our family rhythm had started to shift. Sunday dinners became more balanced. My parents asked about my projects. Sometimes Daniel joined in with questions about business operations or product strategy. Other times he just listened. There was one night after everyone had gone home when my mom lingered by the door. "I saw you on the cover of that magazine," she said. "You looked calm, like you were right where you belonged." I nodded. "I used to worry about you," she said. "Now I don't." That summer, I launched a new program, something I'd been thinking about for years. A mentorship initiative for young designers and creative entrepreneurs trying to build real businesses. I called it Different Paths. The name felt right. The first cohort filled up in 3 days. Most of them were women. A few were working 2 jobs to pay rent and build their ideas on the side. One of them asked me what made me start the program. I told her, "Because sometimes it takes longer to be seen. But that doesn't mean you're not ready." The room went quiet after that. They understood. The next part of my story wasn't about proving anything. It was about giving someone else the room to grow without needing a spotlight to shine on them first. That summer, something shifted. Not just with my family or in the office, but inside me. The urgency to prove myself had faded. What took its place was something steadier, like I'd finally settled into my own skin. I stopped measuring success by who noticed. And when I walked into a room, I no longer hoped to be seen. I knew why I was there. The mentorship program had launched quietly, without press or fanfare. Just an email to our newsletter list and a landing page we built in-house. We called it Different Paths. The name came from the toast I gave at Daniel's party. It stuck. The first group met in person on a Saturday morning in our new conference space. 15 chairs, a pot of coffee, and a whiteboard with everyone's name written in neat print. Most of them were in their 20s or early 30s. A few were older. One woman, Diane, had left her job as a paralegal to start a stationery brand. Another, Alyssa, had spent 5 years working retail while teaching herself UX design at night. They brought notebooks filled with sketches, spreadsheets with budgets that barely balanced, and questions that felt familiar. Too familiar. How do you convince people your work matters when no one around you believes it does? I heard that one more than once. We met every other week. The format was simple peer critiques, guest speakers, business fundamentals. But it wasn't just about learning to pitch or building a client list. It was about learning how to speak about your own work like it mattered, without shrinking. I didn't talk much about my own story during those sessions, just enough to offer perspective. I stayed after every meeting in case someone needed to talk privately. Sometimes they did. Other times, they just sat nearby, quietly gathering courage. One evening, after most of the group had left, Alyssa lingered by the door. "You ever have to take a job you hated just to survive?" she asked. I nodded. I worked at a coffee shop for 2 years while building my portfolio. She relaxed a little. "People keep telling me I should be grateful for where I am." "You don't have to pretend it's easy," I said. She left a few minutes later with her head held higher than when she'd walked in. That week I got a text from Vanessa. "Hey, are you free for lunch next week? Would love to catch up properly." I hadn't seen her since the engagement party. I agreed to meet her near Copley at a cafe she suggested. White linens, glass walls, too many mirrors. The kind of place where the water has lemon by default. She arrived right on time, hair pulled back blazer crisp. She greeted me with a kiss on the cheek like we'd been friends for years. "Rachel, thank you for meeting me," she said, sliding into the booth. "I've been thinking about that night for a while now." I waited. I didn't know she said. "I had no idea what you were building." I thought Daniel was exaggerating, honestly. "I assumed it was just something you were doing on the side." I nodded, not unkindly. A lot of people did. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Anyway, congratulations. The acquisition was impressive." We ordered lunch. Light conversation followed. Her upcoming wedding, the floral arrangements, her family's summer plans. Then she paused. "My father was really impressed with you," she said. "He's been talking about upgrading their in-house design systems. Would you ever consider consulting? I'd be open to a conversation," I said. Her gaze shifted just slightly. "I think it'd mean a lot to Daniel if you two worked on something together. He's been under a lot of pressure." I looked down at my napkin. "We're in different industries." "But the same family," she replied, tone light. We changed topics after that. Dessert came and went. We parted politely. That night I got another message, this one from Daniel. "Vanessa said you had lunch today. Thanks for being gracious. Maybe we could talk soon, just us." The next day he came by the office again. This time he didn't linger in the lobby. We walked along the river instead. He kicked a pebble into the water and said, "You know, sometimes I wonder if I pushed so hard because I was scared." I didn't interrupt. "You always had this inner thing. I didn't get it. Still don't sometimes, but it's real. We walked for a while in silence. Then he said, Vanessa and I are talking about starting a family. I glanced over. He looked different. Not softer, but quieter. Made me think, he added, about what kind of example I want to set, and what kind of brother I've been. We stopped near the bench by the pedestrian bridge. I've been competitive, he said, even when it didn't make sense. I nodded slowly. We all want to be seen. He looked at me. I see you now. I didn't answer right away, but I believed him. That weekend at the next mentorship session, I shared a little more with the group. Not numbers, not press stories, just the early part, the garage, the job rejections, the nights I stayed up wondering if I'd made a mistake. Someone asked what finally changed. I stopped waiting for permission, I said. And I took one step forward, then another, even when it was small. The next part of my journey wasn't about proving anything anymore. It was about what I could help others see in themselves before they ever had to stand in a ballroom holding proof of their worth in their hands. That fall, something unexpected happened. It started with a message from a senior creative director at Visionary Media Group, an agency with offices across the East Coast. He'd heard about Canvas Connect through one of our early beta testers and asked if we'd be willing to come in for a demo. I forwarded the email to my team and asked Miguel to set it up. No pressure, just a meeting. We didn't know it then, but it would be the moment everything changed. 3 weeks later, I stood at the front of their Boston office in a glass-walled conference room watching the Visionary team click through our software. Sophia Kwan, their director, leaned forward in her chair. This is the first platform we've seen that actually understands how designers think, she said. She turned to her team. I want this in place by next quarter. The rollout took 6 weeks. They implemented Canvas Connect across every creative department from content to brand strategy. Not long after Sophia sent us a report. Design output up 40%, revision time down by half. Miguel turned that data into a case study. We published it quietly without advertising, but the industry noticed. Within a month, we were fielding calls from agencies that had never returned our emails before. Requests for demos, partnership inquiries, interview requests. I sat down with our operations lead and watched as our recurring revenue doubled. Then it tripled. I didn't say anything to my family about it. Not yet. At Sunday dinner, my mother asked how work was going. I told her we'd been busy. Daniel was there that night. He brought a bottle of wine and handed it to my dad like he always did. But he didn't talk about markets or bonuses this time. He didn't bring up real estate or promotion cycles. He just passed the salad and asked, "So what's next for Canvas?" I glanced at him. "We're in talks with a few agencies. Nothing final yet." He nodded. "Let me know if you ever need someone to look over the legal side of things." I know people. It wasn't pushy. It was quiet. Offered, then left alone. By December, our office lease was up for renewal. Instead of re-signing, we moved 3 floors up to a full suite with enough room for our growing staff and a training center for our mentorship program. Our name was now on the lobby directory. Canvas Connect in brushed metal lettering on the glass. We held an open house for partners and early users. The day before the event, I walked the floors by myself, checking signage and coffee setups, making sure everything was in place. I stood by the window for a long time, looking out over the city, remembering what it felt like to carry rejection emails in my coat pocket, waiting tables between interviews. Now there were teams in 8 countries using our tools. We'd begun early talks about expanding into education and nonprofit design systems. There were mornings I walked into work and still couldn't believe it. But I wasn't chasing belief anymore. I was building forward. That winter, I got a call from Rebecca Torres. "Are you free next week?" she asked. "There's someone I want you to meet." She didn't say who. We met for dinner at a restaurant near the harbor. White tablecloths, low lighting, the kind of place where conversations feel confidential by default. When I arrived, Rebecca was already seated, and across from her was someone I recognized instantly. Rebecca stood. "Rachel, this is Rebecca Torres," she said, smiling, "CEO of Artemis Digital. And this," she turned to the woman across from her, "is Rebecca Torres, founder of Artemis. My namesake, but not my relative." The woman laughed. "It causes confusion in the system sometimes," she said. "Apologies." We shook hands. Over the course of the meal, she asked about Canvas's origin, our team, our roadblocks. I answered simply, "No pitch, just the truth." At the end of the evening, she set her napkin down and said, "What you've built, it's the kind of innovation we've been trying to foster for years. And you've done it with a clarity most founders take a decade to find." She paused. "Would you consider acquisition?" I sat still. She continued, "We'd retain your team. You'd continue as Chief Innovation Officer. You'd have budget freedom and our full support." I didn't answer that night. But 3 weeks later, I signed the papers. The announcement was scheduled for the following quarter. I didn't tell anyone outside the executive team, not even my parents. Not yet. I worked through the holidays finalizing terms, preparing internal transition plans. It didn't feel secretive. It felt quiet, measured. But when the date for Daniel and Vanessa's wedding approached and the final signatures were behind us, I checked the calendar and noticed something. The formal acquisition announcement would go out exactly 1 week after the wedding. I mentioned the timing to Rebecca in passing. She raised her eyebrows. "Intentional?" I shook my head. "No, just poetic." She smiled. "Let me know if you change your mind." I didn't. Not about the press. Not about the moment. I had no interest in surprises this time. The celebration would be theirs. But something had shifted, not just in how others saw me, in how I walked into a room, in how I listened when someone doubted themselves. The final part of this journey wasn't about a signature or a title. It was what came next, what I did with the room I'd finally made for myself. Daniel and Vanessa's wedding was held at a vineyard outside Lenox. Mid-June, soft breeze, white chairs lined across the lawn, and everything just the right shade of perfect. It was the kind of event that landed in the Sunday lifestyle section, catered, styled, staged, but still beautiful. The ceremony began at 5. I sat on the aisle beside my parents, watching Daniel wait under the arch, his hands folded tight in front of him. When Vanessa walked down the path, he looked the way he did when he used to win something steady, focused, careful not to show too much. After they were announced husband and wife, the applause swelled around us. My mom reached over and squeezed my hand. Neither of us said anything. The reception was held in a converted barn just a few yards from the ceremony site. Vaulted ceilings, chandeliers, made from repurposed wood and glass doors that opened onto the hillside. Tables had name cards printed in cursive foil. I found mine between 2 of Daniel's college friends, both in finance. They were polite, a little distant at first, but warmer after they realized who I was. One leaned over and said, "You're the one who built Canvas, right? My wife uses it at her studio." I smiled, glad to hear that. Dinner moved along courses served in quiet waves. Toasts began just after dessert. Vanessa's maid of honor spoke first, then one of Daniel's business partners. A few jokes, a few memories, some nods to their ambition and future. Then Daniel stood. He held his glass loosely in one hand, the microphone in the other. "I've spent my life chasing things," he said. "Degrees, promotions, deals. And I've always believed in hard work and timing, but lately I've been learning something new." He paused, glancing in my direction. "I want to thank my family," he continued, "and especially my sister Rachel. A few months ago, she reminded me that success doesn't always come from the expected path, that there isn't one single road that gets you there. Sometimes it's quieter, sometimes it's slower, but it's no less real. People turned to look at me. "She's built something remarkable," Daniel said, "and watching her do it has changed how I think about what matters." He raised his glass. "To different paths, and to learning from the ones who walk them with grace." A few people clapped, some nodded. I looked down for a second, then lifted my glass too. The dancing started an hour later. I stayed a little longer, enough to say goodnight to Vanessa and hug my parents goodbye. As I stepped outside, Daniel caught up with me in the gravel lot behind the barn. "You're heading out?" he asked. "Early flight tomorrow," I said. He nodded. That toast, I meant every word. "I know." He looked toward the trees, then back at me. "I keep thinking about what kind of father I'd want to be, what kind of example I want to set. And I don't think win at all costs is it anymore." I didn't say anything. I let the moment settle. "I guess what I'm trying to say," he added, "is I see it now. What you built, who you are, and I'm sorry it took so long." I nodded once. It took time for me, too. We stood there a few more seconds before he smiled and said, "Let's not wait another wedding to talk again." I watched him head back inside the music floating out behind him. That Monday, the Artemis acquisition went public. Headlines ran across tech publications, design magazines, business sites. I didn't check the comments. I didn't post a statement. But the next Sunday, my dad introduced me at dinner as our daughter, the founder. No more qualifiers, no more softening. In the weeks that followed, I got requests from podcasts, speaking events, a few television interviews. I said yes to the ones that felt purposeful, no to the rest, and I started thinking about what came next, not just for the company, but for the people who hadn't yet stepped into their own rooms, the ones still sitting at kitchen tables, building futures no one else could see. Spring came early that year. The city trees bloomed weeks ahead of schedule, and sunlight stretched longer across my office floor each evening. Our team was growing. We'd expanded into 3 new countries, launched an accessibility update, and welcomed our 100,000th user. But it wasn't the numbers that stayed with me. It was the stories. A teacher in Ohio using our tools to help high schoolers design their own yearbook. A retired architect in Michigan who'd picked up digital sketching for the first time in years. One afternoon, I watched a group of mentees from our Different Paths program take the stage at their final showcase. Some had walked away from steady jobs, others had fought to be seen in rooms that weren't built for them, and now there they were, pitching, presenting, holding their ground. Afterward, one of them, Alyssa, pulled me aside. "Thank you," she said, "not just for the tools, but for showing what's possible." I thought about that for a long time on the drive home. What it had meant to build something without applause, without a spotlight, with only the quiet conviction that it mattered, and how long it took to believe that was enough. That Sunday, Daniel and I met for dinner, just the two of us. No parents, no partners, no occasion. We sat by the window at a quiet Italian place we used to visit as kids. He ordered his usual. I ordered mine. Partway through the meal, he said, "I watched the Different Paths live stream. Your closing words hit me." I didn't reply right away. "I've been thinking a lot," he continued, "about the kind of legacy I want, what I want my future kids to see, and honestly, I'm still figuring it out." I nodded. "That's okay." He picked up his glass. "To finding our way, even if it takes a while." We clinked, and the conversation drifted back to stories, memories, and things we'd both missed along the way. Not every scar had healed, but the air between us felt clearer. Looking back now, I don't see the moment at the engagement party as revenge. I see it as reclamation, not just of dignity, but of narrative, of the truth that every person has a right to define their worth regardless of who validates it. For anyone listening who's ever felt invisible at their own table, who's ever been asked to dim their light just to make others comfortable, I hope you remember this. You don't need permission to become who you were meant to be. You don't need applause to take up space. And even if your path isn't understood by the people closest to you, walk it anyway. Because real success isn't about proving them wrong. It's about finally knowing deep in your bones that you were right to begin with. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it resonated, feel free to share it or tell me about your own journey in the comments. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, go ahead and subscribe. Until next time, be kind to yourself and never stop walking your own path.